And you feel like spring is around the corner this morning. It
Yeah,
feels
you do.
different.
And, I'm told officially the drought is over, that we've now gotten back to where we're caught up with our rainfall. And,
in fact, Fellas Lake's overflowing.
That's what somebody else called, which hadn't happened in a long time.
Yeah. Let's get your comments right out of the gate about what's happening over in North Korea.
Well, I think North Korea is a good lesson for us to learn as we look at Iran. I think that's the biggest lesson right now. The other lesson for the world to learn about North and South Korea is, competition works and collectivism doesn't. So you've got this country that got a hold of dangerous weapons and way to make those weapons that can't feed themselves. And so every once in a while, they have to prove not only one to their own country how tough they are, but they have to sort of threaten the world so that somebody helps them do the fundamental things that a society should be able to do for itself, which is just simply feed your people. This will wind up in some kind of agreement where the North Koreans stand down and there's food aid and the things that they can't do for themselves, I believe. But it's you have two new leaders in these two countries, North and South Korea. One's been there about a year, one's been there just a few months, the new president of South Korea. And we're more connected to the South Korean military than we are any military in the world and have been since the Korean War. We're interoperable. We have troops there. I've been there a few times with those troops, and so we'll see. The Missouri part of that story, of course, is that planes from Whiteman over there doing, one, exercises, but two, showing the North Koreans that we can be there and we can be there pretty quickly.
North Korea continues the same old rhetoric, though. It's like in my opinion, it's like a kid standing in a corner screaming, and no one really ever pays attention until they make enough noise, and then we respond, and then it tends to simmer. And then nothing really ever happens, but it just seems like North Korea continues to be bothersome to the world.
Well, they are, but what's the easy solution to that? Again, they have this weapon, and if Iran gets this weapon, we should not let Iran become another North Korea. We should not let Iran become another irresponsible world player that has a very dangerous weapon in an even more dangerous place, the Middle East.
More hostile there, and with Israel nearby.
Well, with Israel nearby, with the jihadist element in Iran and the rest of the Middle East, we shouldn't. Not only should we not let them get a nuclear weapon, we shouldn't let them get to the point that they could make one if they wanted to. There are two different red lines here. I'm not sure which one is the president's red line, but the red line should be we should never let them get to the point that they can refine uranium and other things finely enough to let that ever become a nuclear weapon.
Senator Roy Blunt is here, and pretty excited about the Drury Panthers, Senator.
That is very exciting. That is very exciting. At SBU, I don't think we got to the that's the same Division II basketball when I was the president there. We didn't get to this four. I think we got in the tournament a couple of times. Jerry Kirksey was the coach when I was there, and in fact, was a coach at one time of a great Drury team 30 years ago. But pretty
Jerry
exciting.
Alexander and Nate Quinn and all those guys.
Exactly. Pretty exciting to see Drury playing in the Final Four, and there's one game away from playing in the national championship for Division II. And Division II is good basketball, and then even a Missouri Valley team, Wichita State, it blew my bracket up. I even updated my bracket a few days ago, and I had Indiana winning. I think it was Indiana and Wichita State, wasn't it, last night?
Well, let's see. Who was it against Wichita State?
I think it was Indiana.
Was it?
Which was seeded number one.
Goodness gracious.
So,
Indiana got beat.
Is moving along. And more importantly for Springfield, a lot more importantly, so is the Drury Panthers.
Yeah. Oh, well, we will visit with
LaSalle. It was LaSalle. Yeah. I think I had Wichita State.
Indiana's still in it, I believe.
I think Indiana got beat.
Who beat Indiana? Do you know something?
I can't remember.
But I had Indiana picked in that game, and so did everybody else who seeded that tournament. But, oh well.
Congratulations to the Drury Panthers headed to the Final Four. Senator Roy Blunt is here. 862-9977, 1-800-375-0056. And we'll break for news with Don Paul from the Ozarks News Network newsroom. We'll be back to visit with Senator Roy Blunt on Morning Line, AM 560 KWTO. Senator Roy Blunt is in studio, and our guest this morning, 862-9977, 1-800-375-0056. All right, the gun control issue coming up before the Senate, and there will be a piece of legislation after the Easter recess. Does it have a chance? Of course, it has a roadblock in the House.
Well, it does, and there's a significant block in the Senate to doing anything that diminishes people's Second Amendment rights. And we'll just see. Already the majority leader, Senator Reid, has pulled back from what many people on his side would like to do. Took the weapons ban out of that bill. Clearly, anything that leads to registration of weapons would be unacceptable for a lot of Missourians, and I think most Americans, and I believe most people in the Congress. So we'll see what happens there. But the president's trying to revive that issue, and I assume that's so that you don't have to talk about his budget, which, by the way, the president has now submitted a budget, and it's the first time in 100 years that the president didn't submit his budget before the Congress was done with the process.
It's late.
Well, it's way late, and also he just announced essentially, Tim, I'm going to submit my budget the day they're done voting, which clearly is no way to lead, and is pretty disappointing. But the president's never really been an advocate for a specific set of how you get federal spending under control, and I assume doesn't intend to be in the future. But I think we're going to stick with these spending caps that are in law now, and it's the first tool we've had since I've been in the Congress that actually gives those of us who want to reduce federal spending a lever that we can effectively use.
I mean, the Republicans continue to call for cuts in spending, even though the Republicans are a minority. They only control the House. They've done a fairly good job at keeping that in the limelight, despite the president's smoking mirrors of always wanting to talk about either gay marriage or guns.
Well, he wants to constantly change the subject from the things that are good for an economy that will create private sector jobs. That should be our number one priority. And the president says jobs, but it's like there's no evidence in anything else he does
that it's a priority.
That suggests that it's a real priority, or he understands what it takes to encourage people to create those private sector jobs. You know, we need some government jobs. I'm glad to have one. I'm glad to be in the United States Senate representing our state. But government jobs don't pay the bill. They are the bill. And I'm pretty sure the president doesn't get that at all.
No, the only job is a government job, according to the president.
I think that's the way the government creates jobs is to create government jobs. That's as opposed to
the Keystone Pipeline.
Good energy. Exactly.
That's a perfect way to generate new revenue and jobs where folks are on the line. Private sector can create jobs and thus generate tax revenue that's outside of the government.
The best way to have more tax revenue is not to raise taxes. It's to get more taxpayers. And good energy policy, good tax policy. But let's talk about energy just a minute. You know, the Keystone Pipeline, we had a successful amendment to the budget that passed the other day. I didn't vote for the budget, but neither did several Democrats in the Senate. But the majority. Pardon me, the majority party is the party that's supposed to really present a budget and be able to pass that budget, and they were able to, but just barely, 50-49. But we added an amendment for that endorsed the Keystone Pipeline. A number of Democrats voted for that amendment. A number of Democrats voted with me to prohibit having a tax on carbon that would raise our utility bills, but more American energy, better utility bills are a key part of how we create opportunity. And on that utility bill front, anything we do that keeps the utility bill down, anything we do that creates more stability in gas prices is particularly good for the most vulnerable families. I mean, the last people to get the energy efficient refrigerator and the new better windows and more insulation in their ceiling.
The middle class
are and the middle class and the lowest of those who are trying to pay their own bills and make a difference. And the most vulnerable are truly the most vulnerable when you start doing things like raising utility bills. And the choice for them is not maybe are we going to go out to eat one more time a month. The choice for them is, are we going to have heat, and are they going to shut our utilities off because we can't pay the bill?
It's important to think about the poor, especially on Good Friday, but the middle class have to be thought about as well. And
that's right.
We are so tapped out, Senator, and here we are again, looking at a school tax levy and a bond issue, and it's just a little bit here, a little bit there. It seems as though the middle class every time being asked to pay more, and we really can't pay more.
Well, there's been, particularly in the last 5 years, there's been a real lack of growth relative to everything else for middle class, hardworking American families, and the level of income they have compared to the bills they have is becoming a real problem, and it's the kind of problem that an opportunity society can do something about. It's the kind of problem where if you're look what states are growing in the country and what states are not. The states that are growing are the states that have a more friendly climate to job creation, lower tax bases. People aren't stupid, and eventually they figure out, hey, we got to move from California to somewhere else.
And the states that are growing have fossil fuels, and they're trying to tap them.
Well, they are, and but not all the states that are growing are fuel based. There's a lot of growth that's just tax and good tax policy. We need to be sure we're competitive with our neighbors, because it's pretty easy if you live on the western edge of Missouri just to move across the border if it's a 5% difference in your pay, because if there's that much difference in the state income tax, or if you live on the south part of the state, we have lots of neighbors, more than any other state but Tennessee. We have more states that touch us, and it's pretty easy to just pick up and move and not have to move very far. You don't have to move halfway across the country if we become less competitive. But I think the Missouri General Assembly is pretty aware of that and are trying to do things that make us more competitive. But energy, the river, all this energy in the middle of the country, the Bakken Shale. North Dakota is now the second biggest energy producing state in America. Texas and then North Dakota, that 20 years ago wasn't even on the top list of energy producing states, is now has passed Alaska, has passed California. They're the second biggest energy producing state.
And the United States has as much fossil fuels as any of our countries where we import. It just matters. And now with fracking, it seems as though we should be able to become energy independent.
The energy picture, Tim, is so good that I don't think even the president can mess it up. He can slow it down. Maybe he can mess it up a little bit. He can't stop it. And he's very fond of saying that there's a lot more energy production than when he became president. But none of it has much to do with the government.
It's on private land.
It's on private land.
Yes, sir.
That doesn't have to go through the regulatory process. There's a lot less energy production in the areas where we have traditionally produced a lot of energy. But the private land energy production, we can be energy self-sufficient in North America between Canada and us and Mexico as well. If we'll buy those North American products in pretty easily in 8 years, and even if the president and the EPA and others try to slow that down, within 12 or 14 years, we're going to be not dependent on others for our energy unless we want to be, and that's a huge change in international security. It's a huge change in how we run our economy, and particularly this natural gas, relatively easy to get around a country where you have it, but pretty hard to get to some other countries. So the product that we're paying $3.50, $4 for, people in Europe and Asia are paying $14 and $16 for. That gives us a huge advantage when it comes to making things again, not just the jobs that create the energy, but the jobs that result when you have more American energy.
Senator Roy Blunt on Morning Line. Well, let's back to the president here for just a moment. This is what concerns gun advocates or anyone that's working on issues, is that the president will not be concerned about Congress, but just create an executive order, as he is apparently on the gun issue, that it doesn't matter what Congress says to the president. If I can just make an executive order, I don't need Congress.
Well, and many of the president's policies are now coming home to roost. He made some appointments a year ago to the National Labor Relations Board, to this Consumer Protection Agency, that 3 Court of Appeals judges said a couple of months ago are illegal. Because he made them on the basis that, well, these are jobs that Congress should confirm, the Senate clearly should confirm, but if the Senate's not in session, if they've adjourned and are gone home and there's a vacancy, I can fill it without the Senate, was his point of view. But the Senate said the Senate was still in session. The president doesn't get to decide whether the Senate's in session or not. The Senate gets to decide that. And 3 Court of Appeals judges in Washington, D.C. agreed the other day that these NLRB people are serving, National Labor Relations Board, are serving illegally.
Because it didn't go through the Senate for approval.
Because it didn't go through the Senate for approval, and because the president, while there's a way he can do that, he can't just do it because he decides he wants to do it that day. Finally,
Obamacare is here. We've been thinking about it for a couple of years, and folks are kind of processing it, and now at this juncture, it can't be stopped, but we're learning just how much it's going to cost Americans.
Well, we are, Tim, and it starts officially, in 2014, where everybody has to start paying the penalties. Everybody has to start complying with the minimum policy that you have to offer. And we're going to see a big change in healthcare in the country, and we're going to see it pretty quickly. In exactly the opposite of what the president said would happen, we'll have a whole lot more people uninsured 2 years from now than we had 2 years ago.
Because companies aren't going to be able to afford it. It'd be great if everybody could have insurance, but if your employer can't afford to give you that benefit, then what?
Exactly. And if the penalty is a lot less than it costs to pay the benefit for the new policy. I mean, this idea that when the president said repeatedly, if you like what you have, you can keep it. Nobody even begins to, even the president doesn't say that anymore, because that's clearly as far off base as you could be. We're going to see lots of people go from full-time work or lots of part-time work to the part-time work that doesn't require you to give them insurance. And we're going to see a lot more people working at 2 different restaurants, or a lot more people
having 2 or 3 jobs.
Having 2 or 3 jobs, none of which have benefits. None of which have benefits. And frankly, you're going to see some employers just trying to do what they can afford to do, who say, I've got this really good employee. I can't provide insurance for these employees. I can give him 25 hours a week work. You'd be lucky to have him for another 25 hours. And so your friend who is in a similar business winds up hiring this really good employee so he suddenly got 50 hours of work.
With no benefits.
No benefits, no overtime, none of the things that you would hope a person could have if they're working harder than everybody else.
And small businesses, a typical small, that's what the nation runs on, small businesses. 50 employees is a threshold where you would have to provide insurance. So a lot of the employers will just stay under 50 employees so that they don't have to provide it. So that would hurt job creation in the long run. Why would I want to hire when I'd have to end up by federal mandate provide insurance?
Exactly. And then you're going to see other employers who somebody leaves, and instead of hiring one person for that job, they'll hire 2 part-time people. You actually may have, I think you can probably have more than 50 employees on your payroll as long as you don't have 50 full-time employees. But whether you do or not, it doesn't, your point is exactly right. And, interestingly, Tim, when the government starts telling you have to do something unless you meet these exceptions, then suddenly for the employer that the whole history of their company, they've been doing it because they thought it was the right thing to do. Suddenly all you've got to do is find the exceptions. It's an interesting, again, you mentioned Good Friday. On Good Friday, it's an interesting thing to watch as people who've been trying to do the right thing, suddenly the government says you've got to do this. That whole dynamic changes.
That's when you're set aback, being asked to do something instead of just providing.
And then, like the state of Virginia announced a month or so ago that starting with their new spending year, which is, I believe, July 1, none of their part-time employees will be allowed to work more than 29 hours. And there's only one reason for that. 30 hours is the point you get insurance, and I think they saved several $1 million. So they must have been providing insurance to these very same people up until now, but beginning July 1, nobody who's a part-time employee will be allowed to work more than 29 hours a week, no matter what.
And there's no question now, Senator, Obamacare will occur.
There's no question with the president in place that Obamacare will occur. I think there's also no question that after 3 years of it, 14, 15, and whatever part, and as you get into 16, that as he's leaving, this will be a huge issue in the next presidential election. And the big question is, have we done so much damage to the good health care system that we've had that there's not enough left to rally around and try to turn back and find out how we make – there are a lot of things you can do in health care that would make the system work better. You know, the president started this debate with the false choice of you can do what I want to do or we can do nothing. That is not the choice. There are a lot of things you can do. Medical liability reform, buying across state lines, associated health plans where – the radio station could get its health care as part of some national consortium of small radio stations.
But the difference is you're being told.
Exactly.
That's the big
You're being
difference.
told, and the taxpayers are subsidizing in a way that taxpayers won't be able to afford. There are $1 trillion at least of new taxes and penalties in the president's health care plan, and well over $1 trillion. This is over 10 years. Well over $1 trillion in new government obligations. Remember, everybody who loses their insurance at work goes into that exchange where taxpayers subsidize individuals and families up to 400%.
And that's coming out of my pocket.
Poverty
and I wish I could help, but I can't because I'm tapped.
Exactly.
And that's the typical middle-class American. On Good Friday, it's always a moment to think about your faith.
It is. It is. And, if you have that fundamental faith to rely on, it's a helpful thing. In my mother's Bible, I was going to say a few words at her memorial service 20 years ago now, and she'd written in her Bible, work like everything is up to you, pray like everything is up to God. And I'll just say for me, when I'm at that point where I'm doing all I think I can do, but I don't worry as much about it because I believe there is a higher authority than me, that's when I'm there, and I'm not there all the time, but the moments I'm there, I know I'm there. That, I'm doing what I think is the right thing to do, but I know at the end of the day that I'm not the one that I should rely on here. I should rely on somebody a lot bigger than me.
Senator Roy Blunt, thank you for your time, sir. Appreciate it very much.
Great to be with you, Tim.
I hope you'll be back in the near future.
Good to have you back in Springfield.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be back, and especially on KWTO, the oldest, greatest, biggest signal in Missouri. 862-9977, 1-800-375-0056. It's morning.